KC Cares is the intersection of the nonprofit and profit communities, making Kansas City a better place to live, work, and play. This KC Cares segment is brought to you by the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation, www.kauffman.org. I'm Ruth Baum-Biggis. More than 23% of Americans, almost 63 million people, formally volunteer, providing an estimated 8 billion hours annually. Well, known for its philanthropic heart, here in Kansas City, thousands of volunteers give hours to more than 8,000 nonprofits in and around the metro area. Volunteers are essential for nonprofits to operate. They bring heart to the important work that nonprofits do. Yet it can be challenging to recruit volunteers, manage their force, and retain them for the long run. On this episode of KC Cares Ask the Expert, we're joined by Brent Lager, and he is in charge of UncoverKC, an organization that works to bring together nonprofits with the volunteers they need to provide the most impact. And UncoverKC is celebrating its 10th anniversary this year. We're excited to talk to you, Brent, and learn about all things volunteer.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Really excited to be here.
Well, even though you've been around for 10 years, there may be folks who are not real familiar with your work. So would you share with us what Uncover is all about and what you're doing in the nonprofit sector?
Yeah, absolutely. So Uncover exists to simply connect people with organizations here in Kansas City and help them volunteer. We focus on civic engagement. Been doing it for 10 years. The idea is, we help people act or connect. We then help them act, and that's how we make impact. And we figured out that not only do you need a two-way street on that, we also need some programs and services to kind of ignite that action and spark it. So that is what our various different initiatives do. And we've been doing it, like I said, for almost a decade, coming up in April.
How did you come up with this idea and this concept? And then we'll talk about execution. That's a whole other conversation, right?
Yeah. I was 26 and a sports reporter at the time, actually. I really enjoyed it, but I was looking for more meaning in my life. I had a job I loved. I had friends and a place and lived downtown. But I needed more. There was something in my heart missing. And so my faith led me to go serve, put love in action. And I found it hard to do. I found it much harder to do than I thought it should be. Even when I'd Google or look up places online, it was hard to get connected. It was hard to know where stuff was or who to talk to. And so finally I just walked into a nonprofit downtown after a couple months of struggling to get traction. Morning Glory Cafe still there if you ever want to volunteer in the mornings, serving the home insecure, and asked if we could help, and we walked in and we fed 300 people that day, and that changed my life. It was exactly what I was looking for, wanting to just be on the ground helping. And then what really changed everything was 2 6-year-old kids walked through. And they just asked for an extra piece of candy. We have one bag for 300. So I was only supposed to give one, and I ended up pouring as much as I could into their bags. And they went nuts. I could give anyone candy and they'd go nuts, but just to help someone, even as young as 6, just have joy for a small moment. It was like, this is what I've been looking for. And it all came from volunteering. So wanted to volunteer as much as I could. And I still found it difficult. So I finally was like, this should be easier. What if we just created something that would make it easier? And that's where Uncover was officially born.
So tell us exactly what Uncover does to help move the needle and make it not so difficult.
Yeah. So we have free volunteer connection services. So anyone can go onto our website, UncoverKC.org, and search through a directory of nonprofits we have on there. It's a volunteer directory, so it's kind of lists what their volunteer opportunities are. It's also a really good way for nonprofits to showcase and amplify their voice. We also have a volunteer event calendar on there, so nonprofits submit their volunteer needs and it goes there. And we also have a submission form, so you can actually request specific. Let's say you need something in a certain part of town, or you're looking for a specific type of organization. You can use that form, and that's all free services. We also have paid for services, education programming, putting service learning back into the classroom, providing the expertise and capacity for teachers and administrators to give that to their students. experiential learning to the core, to be honest with you. Corporate cares program, which is helping our businesses and companies around town be the community leaders they want to be, but again, maybe don't have the time or the capacity to do it. So we come in and help them do that. UncoverKC and North Point Development are some of our best partners there. And in the Kauffman Foundation as well. And the community development services, we get, brought in to manage community-wide projects. Right now, our biggest one is KC Field Trips, which is helping make field trips more accessible for all students in the region, no matter what your financial or socioeconomic status is. William T. Kipper Foundation has brought us on, and helped spin that up for them. And then our last one is probably our biggest one at the moment, volunteer management services. We get hired to manage volunteer departments, whether that's for organizations like Unistation or Powell Gardens, or if that's for events like the KC Marathon, Global Entrepreneurship Week, or the most recent one was MLK Day of service with City Year KC.
Okay, so you've just opened up this whole conversation for us. You have an organization, it sounds like, that can help make it easier for nonprofits. So, okay, Mr. Expert, we want to know, how do you do that? You take clients, it sounds like, in addition to being the free resource, but you take clients. So how do you get volunteers? Where are they? How do you make the matches?
Yeah, I don't have a secret sauce, so there's nothing like that. But I do think what we've learned is the 3 R's: recruitment, recognition, retention. You can't have one without the other. And so you need all 3 for it to work. And then the other phrase we use a lot is involvement equals investment, and investment equals involvement. So what we mean by that is once you start setting up a department, a volunteer program, or these pipelines, going and meeting with people and speaking to their groups in person or email or finding out what's within a 20-mile radius, what schools are around, who needs service hours or who is interested in the type of volunteer opportunities that we have, who might be interested, assisted living, churches, school, corporations. I mean, you can go down the list, but it just takes time to reach out and get denied, and then reach out again and get denied and reach out again and finally get the yes. It takes capacity. It takes a soft, strong touch, that firm touch. So all of that kind of comes into the first R, recruitment. But before even doing that, you have to have you need a system in place. If someone says yes, do you have, a place for them to sign up? Is it easy for them to do? Is it, does it explain everything? Are you getting waivers in the process? Are you making sure, risk management's taken care of? It's all, when you have all that, is it online? Is it easy to find on the website? That is part of the biggest thing. If I Google volunteer Union Station, what will pop up? Because that is where everyone's going to go first. And what does it look like on their phone? Not on their laptop, but on their phone. Because more and more, there's more and more people use their phone to everything, even when their laptop's 5 feet away. So it's just going in and looking at it from the point of the volunteer and building out a program that works for both them as well as, the organization or the project that needs it. I think the last thing really is communication. Once someone does sign up, are you giving them instructions? When are you giving it to them? If it snows, if it rains, if it's sunny, like do they know what to wear? What to bring? If something goes wrong, who they call? All these things step by step. That's how you make a quality, healthy volunteer department is having those things in order and having someone manage it. And it's hard. It's really hard. That's why we have a service that does that, and we get paid to do it, because it takes a level of expertise and time, commitment, and knowledge to do it. And I will say the organizations I think that invest in that are the ones that pull the most from it, because they are really putting the capacity in there to bring it about.
You provided some great information in terms of, the recruitment aspect of it. From your standpoint and the organizations you've worked with, when you're working with a nonprofit, are there things that you suggest they look into in
Mhm.
terms of crafting what's our ideal volunteer?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love that question. We call them volunteer personas, where, so our, let's just start through the demographics, our high schoolers, they all need service hours. Real world learning is exploding through the metro area. And they need these market value assets. They need these hours to graduate, to get scholarships. And so if you can frame and design your volunteer assignments and descriptions to be able to fit those, and be ready to work when you get great. Not only do you get more volunteers that way, they bring great energy. It's like you're cultivating the next generation of supporters and stakeholders and donors, hopefully. And so why wouldn't you want to do that? And I see a ton of nonprofits don't do that. And probably because it takes time. It does, that they are, 15, 16, 17, 18. I mean, they're still kids, but it's so worth it if you do it right. And you can cultivate a lot of volunteers that way, that pipeline. Young professionals, I would say, the 20 to 30 year olds are probably more altruistic than maybe any other demographic. I think it's because they don't have families yet. And so they have the time, the energy. But here's the thing, you have to go where they're at. You can't expect them to come find you because you're just out in the world with everything else. And there's just so much out there. So how are you getting in front of young professionals? There's only so many young professional groups in town. So are you going to corporations? Are you getting the marketing kits, recruitment kits with social media graphics and pitch decks already put together, so they just can pass it along to their employees? How are you making it easier and turnkey for these organizations you're trying to recruit from? So then you move into the family. Can you have something that can bring kids? Can they bring their kids and volunteer? And not every opportunity has to be the same thing or include all the age demographics, but every organization should have something for each age demographic. And so this is a big one, is can they bring their kids? And then you can really start catching fire if you get into military bases. There's a ton of families there and they want to get involved, and we have a lot of great military bases around here. Churches there as well, and then as they get older, they retire, are more experienced volunteers. They're some of the best because they have the time and their willingness. And so are you crafting? I have found that they want more education. Like, tell me what you need and I'll do it. But, don't spur anything last minute on that, just lay it all out. Let them know what you need. And it's funny because I think all generations like that, that's not just, our golden generations, but those are all, if you can figure out how to tailor to each of those demographics and have it that way, you're not saying no, but maybe just not yet, or maybe not this thing, but would you be open to doing this thing? That's how you really recruit well, because you're never saying no then.
We're talking with Brent Lager. He's with UncoverKC, and he is our Ask the Expert on volunteerism. So you've talked about ways and making sure you're looking across a demographic. Mm-hmm. Once you've got that volunteer recruited, what are the key things you should keep in mind as the nonprofit? Man, you have really good questions. And I think the number one thing to remember is they're not getting paid. A lot of organizations will view their volunteers as paid staff, which is good in one way because you want to treat them as equals. But you also have to understand that they're not, they're not going to put up with stuff because they're not, if they're just not, you need to treat them right with respect, like you should your own staff, but you also need, to make sure they're valued and that you're putting them stuff they can do. If you're wanting them to be guest relations or customer facing, you better have training with that. And you don't expect them to come in and not be available to do that. If you're wanting a lot of that, you better be able to do that in a short amount of time to a lot of people. Not everyone's going to be coming for a 2-hour training. If you need 50 volunteers to do a holiday season. So how do you, get that learning curve for the education, and how do you perfect that? How do you get that information out?
Are you getting are you sending confirmation details to them a week in advance or 3 days in advance? Usually we try to get 3 to 7 days in advance. I really like to get around 5. That's my happy place, but that doesn't always work. Sometimes you have to wait to get confirmation on what everything they need. But that's really, how are you communicating the information to them? Is it clear? Are you're not overwhelming them with too much? You can make documents, and when they show up, you just hand them the how-to. You don't have to send them in all of one email. Where they check in, what do they wear, what should they bring? Sign the waiver. There you go. And then you can provide the rest of the training when they get there. Now, if it's more than that training, are you recruiting the right type of people? Is that general public? Is that, someone who can come in, or should you be going after more skilled, reoccurring volunteers to fill those needs? So I think all of those are type of the missteps I see from across the board. And it's like, the more you kind of perfect that and get those right and standardize them, use the same, build consistency, the easier it becomes for not just, the volunteers, but for your staff to deal with it and what to expect from them. And the last thing I always say is never have a volunteer opportunity that can't be done covered by a staff member, because if it's bad weather, if someone gets sick, if their car doesn't work, if they have to stay late for school, if it's too dark at night, whatever the case is, again, they're not paid. You have to respect that, and having a backup plan for when, they just won't make it, then that's really what you should do. And far often it doesn't happen enough.
They don't get paid in money, but they do ultra,
oh man,
from that side. They tripped on that word, but
yeah, they reap plenty of rewards, and they'll come back if you continue to encourage those rewards. But I think people think they're free, and they're not. That you have to make sure you have backup plans and treat them right.
They're a heart and soul employee. Mm-hmm. Not that paid employees aren't, but they're coming in for those kinds of reasons. What in the 10 years that you've been working around this whole volunteer sector or volunteer element of nonprofits, what are kind of the big boo-boos you have seen, and what are the ways that they could have been fixed or you should watch out for? Yeah,
I think the lack of flexibility, it's, you're not always gonna get the perfect volunteer, it takes time to develop that and to cultivate that relationship. And so the lack of flexibility to work with volunteers that aren't ready or still learning, or ones that come from different places, different ages, different backgrounds, different cultures. It's like, you have to be open to that and not closed off. Things won't go the way they're supposed to. That's just the beauty of plans. And that's why you make them. And then that's why you make up backup plans. And so being flexible in that, I think it is really key. I think some of another pitfall I see is just the lack of continuing appreciation. So what we mean by that is, I see a lot of places we have a volunteer appreciation dinner at the end of the year, and that is nice. That is good. But what about the rest of the 364 days of the year? We actually like to break them up into quarterly events, because we've learned that volunteers like that social element. And so can we have a smaller low lift event in the spring, and then we'll see you again in the summer in a few months, instead of seeing you 9 months later, and cultivating that relationship more. Are those little things, it doesn't have to be major awards, but just, pins, lanyards, things that showcase that they're a volunteer. I love doing handwritten notes from staff. Now, if you have a huge volunteer department, you can't do that all the time, but it's really nice sometimes just getting a handwritten thank you card from a staff member that you work with regularly. And it has a couple free passes to it, to whatever attraction you might have or thing you're doing. So I think it's little things like that. Appreciation is done, I think should be done on a more day-to-day, week-to-week basis than what is done. And so, and then the last one I see a lot is, again, I talked on this earlier, it's just not having your infrastructure in place. Like, and again, it takes time, and I understand a lot of what we're talking about takes time, but you need to have from point A to point B. How easy is it for volunteers activation points to get them involved? It shouldn't take them more than 2 clicks to sign up. I don't need to know references and, your childhood address, or what your favorite thing is. I can get that information later on when you come in for orientation, or when we sit down and we get a talk, or over the phone. Like that first initial capture, you just got to make it easy and eliminate the barriers and just get the basics of what you need. When I was in the newspaper, they always talked about it. You have 4 seconds to get someone's attention, and photos are always taking up, the first thing you look at. So on your website, what are you doing with it? If they're going to Google you and go to your website, you better have your volunteer link easy to find, and you better have a sign up form really easy to find, and get involved. And so, sometimes it doesn't always work that way, and sometimes you can't get it there, but I really push people to eliminate the barriers as much as possible and increase the activation points as much as possible.
Brent, you've given us a great segue into retention of volunteers. You spend the time to go and find them somewhere in the various ways you recruit. You bring them in, you train them. They've got value. So how do you keep them engaged and involved with your organization?
Yeah. So recognition, of course, is a big part of that. But there's 2 other things that I think go a long way to communication. I know that sounds weird, but regular communication. Do you have a newsletter going out every 2 weeks or once a month? We really push for every 2 weeks. And does that newsletter have information on what your needs are, or how to record hours? How are you updating them, in that newsletter? And then, social media. We have found, Facebook groups or private Facebook groups are a good way of keeping people up to tabs. It doesn't always work. Not all demographics like Facebook or use Facebook, but it is most people know of it. and at some point in time, maybe it had a profile. And so it's a good way to, just another way of getting the words out. A bulletin board, I know that's old school, but it is nice just to have something up for those that walk by. It isn't, again, it's more evergreen, right? It has to be something that maybe just once a month you're updating, but it's a nice thing to have. So that communication is a huge thing. And then the second thing is opportunity. Like, how often are you asking them? I feel like sometimes, and I do this, sometimes you ask them once and you think you just expect them to keep coming back, or, how often are you asking them to come serve, and how often are you asking about their experience? Did you have a good time? Are things going well? What can we do better? Let them feel valued, that you're listening to them. And that goes a long, long way to building that relationship and making them want to be a part of the organization, which is the whole idea of retention, right? So those are some of the 3 things that, we key in on and work as a team to increase for our partners.
We talk in organizations a lot of times about the importance of mentorship, one employee to another. If you happen to be working with, let's say, a youth group or something, mentoring those clients. How is there a role for mentorship within your volunteer ranks?
Yeah, I absolutely believe so. Let me use an example. At Union Station, we have a volunteer lead program. And so, my team runs the volunteer department, but we have around 7-8 volunteer leads. They're multiple days during the week, and they're kind of our eyes and ears. And so we meet with them every 2 weeks in person. If there's an issue, they often let us know. They're the ones there. We communicate with them pretty much everything we're doing, so then they can disperse that down. When there's new trainings, orientations, they're often the ones who can help put those on. It gives you another layer, and I think the mentor aspect, it doesn't have to be your traditional one-on-one. I mean, that's great to have, but sometimes you just need someone that, like, if there's an issue, I know who to go to. And so building just a nice leadership group around that, I have found helps. It is great. You can get one-on-one. Sometimes you can do a buddy program where you have a new volunteer comes in and you assign them to an experienced one, and that's who trains them and kind of gets them going. You have to make sure your communication and your your experienced volunteers are up for that, but it is a great way to kind of have a welcome ambassador, so to speak. And that's another way of doing it. Selecting a handful of volunteers that you kind of designate as ambassadors. And again, like the volunteer leads, they can handle the orientation or they're just in charge of when new volunteers come on board, getting them connected, getting them trained, and making sure they're integrated. So all those are ways of doing it. I find mentorship seems to be the volunteer task that almost every single nonprofit has, no matter what the need or type or cause. Everyone has mentorship opportunities, and volunteer departments are no different. So if you're able to, and you have the capacity, it helps a lot.
It sounds like, and you're sharing your experience and being our expert, that it really does pay to take time to develop a volunteer program, whether you have a volunteer manager or somebody on the team that is also going to take on those responsibilities. But, take the time, find a system, make it easy, know there's backup, appreciate your folks, let mentors rise to the top.
Yep.
How do volunteers play a role in your organization itself?
Yeah. So, we didn't actually do fundraising until 2016. So first 3 or 4 years, we had no money. We just built it with volunteers. I think my first paycheck was $500. And I couch surfed for a few years just to build up, to build the nonprofit. But it was, I think that's kind of how I learned a lot about this is there was, I knew I couldn't do it alone and nor should I. And so I was able to locate people who had skill sets and expertise, and we built things. So our website, completely volunteer developed. Our volunteer committees, we actually have 36 volunteer staff right now. We break them up into committees, board of directors, advisory council. Our board of directors is a service board. So while they do have a small fundraising expectation, we more want them to be serving on committees. So they serve on the very committees that the rest of our volunteers do. Those committees meet once a month, and then they get a project-based task that they do on their own time. Now, if there is a deadline to it, we make sure it's still a volunteer that has the capacity to do that, or paid staff does it. But, you talk about the social media, the website, design, donor follow-up, grant outreach, grant reporting, impact reports, recruitment for other partners like Unistation and Pal Gardens. I mean, it's using volunteer service to build the enterprise. That service enterprise model is really what we've jumped into and grabbed full hands. So that's how we built it up. I am now the one of 3 full-time employees, and then we have 7 other paid contractors. There's 10 paid staff, and then we have 36 volunteer staff. And to us, it's all staff. But we do recognize, like I was saying earlier, sometimes the volunteers just don't have time or capacity to do what you need. So that's where we get the paid staff in there.
Brent, we are so grateful to you for sharing your expertise and your resource of your organization. And we thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us on KC Cares, Kansas City's charitable voice. We're produced by Charitable Communications. This segment was brought to you by the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation. If you'd like to be a guest on KC Cares or to follow us, visit our website at kccaresonline.org and spread the love. You'll find us on Facebook and Twitter at KC Cares Radio and on Instagram at KC Cares Online. And you can catch us Saturday mornings at 8 a.m. on 1510 a.m. and 94.5 FM. Thanks for joining us on KC Cares.